Hello, I'm Dr. Lel Russell, physiotherapist from Nottingham, and I'm going to talk about the challenges of national clinical audit in the community. I'm using the National Stroke Audit as an example. So to give you some context, in the UK, someone has a stroke every 5 minutes. So 2 people by the time I finish speaking. And that's more than 100,000 people each year, 90,000 of which will require admission to hospital for surgical intervention, medical treatment, or rehab after their stroke. Driven by improvements in efficiency and shifts in policy towards community-based care, the lengths of these hospital admissions has fallen significantly over the last 2 decades, from an average of 34 days in 2001 to just 17 in 2023. So bearing in mind that over 60% of stroke survivors require ongoing input when they leave hospital, this means a considerable amount of rehab is being provided by community services. And to be clear, hospital and community services are very different. For example, hospital stroke care is relatively standardised. There's a core team of doctors, nurses, and therapists working together on stroke units. And if you compare the service provided, say, in Nottingham, that should be pretty similar to that provided in London or Leicester. Patients stay in hospital for a discrete chunk of time until they're safe to be discharged home to continue their rehab if needed. In comparison, services provided by community teams vary between regions. As you can imagine, there are differences in populations and the environments that teams work in. Teams also vary in terms of their size, their skill mix, and therefore the services they can offer. But how do we measure and ultimately improve the quality of care provided to stroke patients? One established quality improvement tool is clinical audit. In its simplest form, audit is a 4-stage cycle. This starts with planning what needs to be measured, then collecting this data, using data to identify what change is needed, and finally, monitoring performance. And the data I'm focused on is that generated from the Sentinel Stroke National Audit Programme, or SNAP. SNAP collects a core data set for every stroke patient admitted to hospital in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the audit collects all sorts of data around stroke care, including the organisational structure, for example, how many stroke specialist nurses or therapists a hospital has, measures of processes, such as how long it takes to get a scan, how many minutes of therapy a patient receives, and most importantly, outcomes of care. In other words, what recovery patients make. And as you can imagine, there is a vast amount of data generated by this audit. And so far, this data has been used to address a wide range of research questions, exploring the quality of stroke care, the relationship between how hospitals are organised, and how this affects patients' outcomes. Policy initiatives within the NHS have been informed by the audit, including national stroke strategy and models of service delivery. And evidence suggests that the audit has been successful in driving improvements for hospital-based stroke care. And this has been done by highlighting variations in clinical practice and enabling comparisons with national clinical guidelines. But all this is within the hospital setting. What about all that data that is gathered as part of the audit by community teams who provide a different model of rehab in very different circumstances? Community stroke teams commit considerable time and resources to collecting data for the audit, and how this data contributes to quality improvement hasn't been investigated. Therefore, this study set out to explore how audit can drive quality improvement in community stroke rehabilitation. And this was a realist evaluation. As such, it sought to understand what works, for whom, how, and under what circumstances. And data was gathered from multiple sources, including the existing literature, an online survey, and interviews with stakeholders. And these stakeholders included anyone working in, leading, managing, or commissioning community stroke services. And the study found the ability of audit to influence quality improvement in the community was dependent on 3 key factors: the organisational support available, communication along the clinical pathway, and perceptions of data accuracy. Findings highlighted that community teams are passionate and motivated to improve the quality of care they provide, but they face a number of challenges. I'm going to discuss how each of these three factors influence the ability of community teams to use their data for quality improvement. Firstly, if there was organisational support for audit, then teams were much more likely to be engaged. In other words, they were attempting to use audit data to improve their services. And one aspect of this organisational support was leadership interest. Teams who were aware of interest from within their organisation, for example, their data being discussed at performance meetings, were more likely to be engaged. Although a lack of interest didn't stop teams collecting data, those teams rarely reported using it for quality improvement. Instead, they described it as a burden without any benefits. And champions were described as facilitating participation in the audit by providing positive role models and sharing knowledge. But these champions were not tokenistic roles assigned to random individuals. Instead, they were fostered in response to genuine interest in quality improvement. Roles were often shared by two people, one in a position of authority and the other more closely involved in data collection on the ground. And this champ and chief model was described as motivating teams to participate and then keeping them engaged. And as well as reducing the burden of data collection on clinical staff, having dedicated admin support was seen as an indication that the organisation valued audit and it was important. And this meant teams felt audit was a legitimate activity, and there was an expectation that data was necessary to bring about improvement. Secondly, channels of communication between teams across a clinical pathway supported the submission of data. And these channels enabled collaboration around shared goals, such as the timely transfer of records or the submission of complete data. In addition, they provided opportunities for quality assurance and skill sharing between providers and across organisational boundaries. And participants reported communication as being more efficient and less frustrating when there were clear signposting to adjacent providers along their pathway. For example, something as simple as having contact details for key individuals within each organisation. And finally, if teams were confident in the accuracy of data contained in feedback, they were more likely to use it for quality improvement. For example, if they felt it didn't capture the whole of their caseload or reflect the service they actually delivered, they were unlikely to use it to inform business cases or develop services. In addition, the routine local data collected by an organisation, such as staffing levels and referral numbers, offered a local context and a narrative for national audit data. Together, these enhance the credibility and the confidence in using audit data for quality improvement. So findings highlighted a number of challenges that are specifically pertinent to national audits that extend into the community setting. Community teams lack the organisational support, such as IT or admin infrastructure, to support participation. And as the centre of gravity for many services, including stroke rehab, move out of acute hospitals and into the community, so should the resources to monitor and improve the quality of these services. And currently, there are no incentives for services to communicate across a clinical pathway. The motivation for providers to upload data is linked to achieving a score for their individual organisation. If stroke care is to be seamless, as outlined in current practice, consideration needs to be given to the incentivisation or commissioning of whole pathways with shared goals, rather than the piecemeal services that patients currently experience. And finally, stakeholders won't use data if they don't trust it. Digitisation presents a number of opportunities to improve data accuracy by reducing human error, capturing routine data, and reducing the burden of data collection. But this is going to need bold systems leadership to rationalise existing digital platforms and enable the efficient transfer and use of data along a clinical pathway. In summary, community stroke teams are already engaged in the national audit, and many are using data from it to improve the quality of their services. But this study has identified a number of challenges that face teams in the community. These need to be overcome if the potential of audit as a quality improvement tool in this setting is to be realised.